Hello and good evening everyone. I welcome you all to our YouTube channel. And in this series of Bulldoze Topic of the Week, today we are going to discuss the most recent report which is given by Oxfam International on the rising inequalities in India. And they have named this report, which is a kind of a satire, that is Surviving of the Richest. So I'm sure that you have heard this phrase, that is survival of the fittest, which means that any species on this planet can survive only if it brings adaptation or evolve over the period of time. But on the very contrary to this report, which states that over the period of time, the riches have become richer and the poor have become poorer, especially in the post-pandemic times. So in this episode, we are going to discuss about this report and what all consequences the Indian population have suffered due to the pandemic. So let's get started. Firstly, let's understand about this report. So like I had mentioned, this report is titled as The Survival of the Richest, the India's Story, which give a very brief headline, and I'm sure you will be amazed to read that the richest 1% of the India's population, which is of course the 1% billionaires of India, they consists of more than 40% of the country's total wealth, while the bottom half of the population, which is merely bottom 50% of the India's population together, they share merely 3% of the total wealth. And this is subject to the timeline between 2012 and 2021, which means in a decadal time, the billionaires have accrued more wealth as compared to the previous decade of 2002 to 2012. Now, reading a brief about the Oxfam International. So, Oxfam International is a confederation of 21 independent charitable organizations who are working together with partners and local communities in more than 90 nations. And Oxfam works to find the practical, innovative ways for the people to lift themselves out of the poverty and thrive. So basically, this Oxfam International is kind of a charitable organization which works to find out the more practical and innovative ways for the people to lift them out of the poverty, and its mission is to end the injustice that causes poverty further. Of course, we all know that poverty is the consequence of the inequalities which the marginalized population suffer in any particular nation. So, Oxfam International try to pick out all those inequalities that are surrounded by these marginalized communities and even females. So, even according to this report, the females and children, they remain the most sufferer, right? So now let's move on to the key insights of this report and key findings of this report. So Oxfam International report specifically for the India, its supplement of its annual inequality report, which was first it was presented and it was published on the first day of the World Economic Forum annual meeting, which is held at Davos, Switzerland. So I'm sure you all know of this meeting, World Economic Forum, where the top eminent businessmen, leaders, spokesperson, politicians, even the environmentalists, the philosophers, so they all are welcomed in this meeting and they put their thought, they put their theories regarding the development, of course sustainable development and eco-friendly, and they always talk about reducing inequalities and inclusive growth. That has always been a key agenda here, right? Then next, the Oxfam adds that India has the world's highest number of poor at 228.9 million. On the other hand, the total number of billionaires in India increased from 102 in 2020 to 166 billionaires in the year of 2022. So it is such an irony to read it that on one hand the number of poor population, the number of poor persons in India have increased, and on the other hand the billionaires have also gone up. The number of billionaires have also gone up, and in a span of just 2 years. It means that pandemic on one hand has actually taken a lot from many people, many families, while on the other hand it has given a lot and made them billionaires overnight. So of course I'm not saying that they have not worked hard. Yes, of course even they have worked hard, but the rise in the billionaires have somehow given us an idea that we know that resources are limited. So we have limited resources, and we have the population that is actually utilizing the limited resources. Now when we look at the allocation of these resources, it is a basic microeconomic principle of the opportunity cost, of the optimum utilization of resources, and even the central problems of economy. So this is a very basic microeconomic theory which states that scarcity is a big issue in an economy, and there must be a proper allocation of resources, otherwise the majority of the population will suffer. And the same is happening in India, because the resources are, of course, they are concentrated to top 10%, to all these billionaires, and the bottom 50% of population is struggling with even with the basic necessities also, right? Now moving ahead with some other key insights. So according to this report, that is the survival of the richest, like I had mentioned. So it also states that between the timeline of 2012 and 2021, the 40% of the wealth created in India has gone to just 1% of the population, which ideally means the top 1% of billionaires, and only a mere 3% of the wealth has gone to the bottom 50% of population. So here you will get a clear understanding of inequality going on in the economy. So top 1% of population, top 1% of billionaire, they hold 40% of India's property, India's wealth, whereas the bottom 50% of population consists merely 3% of the total wealth. And here we are talking about the wealth, not the GDP, not the money, not the income. Here we are talking about the properties that they are holding, the gold, the billions that they have. We are only talking about the wealth, right? So that definitely more than nearly 40% is with top 1% of the billionaires, right? So adding that, the total number of billionaires in India, of course, like I had mentioned before, that it has increased from 102 to 66 billionaires in 2022. Also, the combined wealth of the India's top 100 richest billionaire have actually gone up to $660 billion. So this is the combined wealth of the top 100 richest billionaires in India, which is sums up to $660 billion US dollars. And it is even said that this amount, if we consider it that it is with the government, then government can fund the Indian budget for good about 18 months. So you can say that this is the actual figure if we use it in India and we use it for the development programs. So our government can fund 18 months of the planned actions, right? So this is a huge amount, of course. So like, while even on the parallel side, the country is suffering from the hunger, unemployment, inflation, and health calamities, the India's billionaires are doing extremely well, even at the pandemic and the post-pandemic times. The poor in India especially they're unable to afford even the basic necessities, and like I had mentioned, the poverty headcount has actually gone up in the post-pandemic times, right? And if I talk about the wealth of the top 10 richest individuals in India, so it sums up to be nearly around rupees 27 lakh crores. So this is basically the wealth. This is the wealth accumulation of the top 10 richest individuals in India, which sums up to be nearly 27 lakh crores, right? So again, if we talk about, from the pandemic times, if I talk about, the pandemic times, the bottom 50% definitely their income has been chipped off, it has been swayed away during the pandemic, and all thanks to the tax rates and inflation that has taken the majority of the income of the bottom 50% population. So even their income share, which was estimated to fall to only 13% of the national income, and they have less than 3% of the wealth, like we have mentioned before. And even there are certain other changes which were made before by the government. They have cascading impact on the income of the bottom 50% of the population, while the top richest person, or the top 10 or top 20%, they were kind of, they were kept away from heavy tax payment, which made our tax rate system quite regressive in nature. I am sure that you know what is regressive taxation, that the top earners of the nation, or if you are actually falling in the higher income slabs, then you will have to pay a lesser tax rate, while if you are at the bottom tax slab, then you will have to pay a very higher tax rate, right? So kind of the situation right now due to the GST has turned up to be the most of the burden is on the marginalized sections as compared to the richest. So the indirect nature of the GST and the fuel taxes have actually made a very regressive taxation pattern, which are actually putting a lot of burden on the marginalized section, of course, right? Then next, if I talk about the all India inflation level, which is based on the CPI, that is Consumer Price Index General, and the Consumer Food Price Index. So they were consistently higher in the rural India. So this is bit on an ironic note, that in the rural India, the inflation is higher, which means that the prices of the basic necessities, maybe fruits, vegetables, pulses, so all the agro products, the prices of the agro products have gone up as compared to the urban India, which was somewhere 7.27%, right? So even it is mentioned that out of the total taxes which is collected from the food and the non-food items, somewhere 64% of the total tax is actually coming from the nearly 64% of the tax is actually coming from the bottom 50%, which again means that the burden of taxation is actually lying more on, and it is actually skewed towards the bottom 50% of population, and it is lesser and lesser shared by the richest population of India, right? So even it is according to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, it states that the incidence of inflation is also on a higher side as compared to the richer side. And even if the overall inflation has declined in October 2022, but still its regressive impact was seen higher on the rural India as compared to the urban India. So even which means that the prices of the food, vegetables, the fruits and pulses, oil, so ghee, butter, so all these prices have severely impacted the inflation of rural India, and it has given much more benefits to the agro-based industries as they have inflated their prices. Definitely. So all the agro-based industries, the food processing industries, they have inflated their price, which again have been sold at a higher price to the consumers, and then this cycle goes on as consumer is already paying a very higher GST, and because of this chain effect, that higher price of the raw material leads to higher price of the final product, ultimately selling it to the consumer who's already paying a high GST. So this entire chain is again kind of a pressure to the consumers, again the bottom 50% of the population, right? Now moving on to the next, that is the gender and social inequality, which is quite now very, I would say, an inevitable part of India that we always face, and we always, in every report there is a separate segment of gender and social inequality which is quite prevalent in India for like from the centuries now. So this report also highlighted that the gender inequality in India, stating that if a female worker is earning and she's being hired for the same role, then she will be given 63 paisa as compared to 1 rupee given to a male. So this of course the wage disparity is higher in context of the gender. Then secondly, if we talk about the country's marginalized communities such as the Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims and women and other informal sectors, so they continue to suffer in the system that prioritize the survival of the richest. Of course, the informal workers, they are paid less. Marginalized sections, they are again paid lesser. Right. Now, speaking of the source of the data, so this data, Oxfam International prepared this report by taking the source of data from multiple sources. For example, Forbes, Credit Suisse, and even some government sources have also been used. For example, the data from NSS, that is National Sample Survey, Union Budget documents, and some parliamentary questions have also been used while preparing this report. Right. Now, lastly, if we talk about what are the suggestive measures which are given by and which are even suggested by the report. So, to combat this problem, definitely the higher burden of taxes should be on the richer through a combination of the measuring, including one-time solidarity taxes and raising the minimum rates for the wealthiest. It is said that if top 5% of the billionaires are being charged, let's say, if top 10, I would say top 10 richer billionaires are charged 5% of tax, then that the amount accumulated is enough to bring children back to the schools who have dropped because of the lack of funds. So this is the level of inequality that India is currently into. So Oxfam International has also called for the food companies that are making large profits as the inflation has surged to face the windfall taxes. So again, that is very important because if any food processing industry is already, it is earning a extraordinary high profits due to maybe some natural disaster or some war-like situation. So it has actually caused the hike in the prices of the necessity items. And if you are a food processing industry, definitely your profit margin will be much higher than before. So in this way, like according to this report, it is mentioned that they must be levied with the windfall taxes, that the additional gains which they have derived from an additional cost, from an additional event that has happened, and that is not a very normal event of happening, right? So that is the suggestive measure, and even according to this report, it is now high time for the government to enhance the budgetary allocation of the health sector to nearly 2.5% of the GDP. Nearly 2.5% of the GDP should be dedicated exclusively to the health sector, and even the education sector also requires minimum of 6% of GDP. So this is a suggestive measure under this report, that now it is imperative for Indian government to put more focus on the health and education element of India, as they are somewhere being lagged behind over the years, which has again had a cascading effect on the Indian economy. So that is all related to this report, and we have seen that how India is moving towards inequality, and it is actually creating a widened gap between the richer and the poor. Of course, with the report's name, survival of the richest, it is an it is an alarming signal to all the Indians, to the government, that it is important to focus on the redistribution and mobilization of resources in a way that the fruit of the growth will be, of course, it will be enjoyed, should be enjoyed by all the Indians deep down at the grassroots level. Right. So there is one small announcement. Whosoever wants to apply in the IMB program, which is International Masters of Business, which is programmed at SDA Bocconi Asia Center. So whosoever wants to apply, just hurry up, as their deadline is closed on January 20th. So hurry up and don't miss the deadline if you want to take admission at SDA Bocconi Asia Center. So that is all for today, all of you. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share it among your friends, and keep following us. Don't forget to hit the bell icon as well, and keep following us for more such content. Thank you so much.